Well, the media is hysterical that people exposed to the hantavirus from a cruise ship have disembarked and are just roaming the earth freely now, sent back to all four corners of the earth, ready to infect you. Should you panic? Well, let's back up, because the story goes that people have tested positive for the virus and they were sent off the ship, and now we're getting positive test cases from a flight attendant, someone in Korea, someone in this country, that country. But what do we actually know about hantavirus testing? Does it have the same reliability problems that the COVID-19 PCR tests have? We are told that the Andes hantavirus test has a very high mortality rate, but do we know that it's that strain? How do they test that? And is the morbidity rate the same as people with comorbidities as it is for people without? Now, thankfully, we've learned to ask these questions because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have a few other things to note. First off, hantavirus is not known to spread between humans. If it is doing that now, this could indicate that it's been manipulated. Also, hantavirus is an RNA virus, which could mean that ivermectin is a possible therapeutic, according to some doctors. We're going to talk about that in a second. Will the government prevent us from knowing that, like it did before about other viruses? Also, incidentally, in 2024, Moderna announced here that they were working on a vaccine. And also, eagle-eyed observers have pointed out that the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine had listed amongst its adverse events hantavirus. What you see here is a list of possible adverse events around the next one. Can we move that one? Yes, here. A list of possible adverse effects of the COVID-19 vaccine. You see, this is dated 2021. It's not saying they observed it. It's saying they were looking for it. Okay, why would they be looking for hantavirus as a possible adverse event for the COVID-19 vaccine? Also, social media around this outbreak on the cruise ship is very strange. I linked you today to this video in the newsletter. If you haven't seen it, she's saying that the only people posting social media content around this cruise outbreak are influencers or people who work for the cruise line. It's very strange and inconsistent. And two other oddities we should consider. First of all, this has gone viral. In 2022, someone posted that COVID would end in 2023 and that hantavirus would pop up in 2026. Is that a coincidence? We don't know. And also, as Clayton mentioned earlier, it was also mentioned in an episode of The X-Files in the 90s, discussed as a way to expand government control. Watch this short clip.
Did you write?
You know my work? I was right about Dallas, wasn't I?
How were you right?
Are you familiar with the hantavirus, Agent Mulder?
Yeah, it was a deadly virus spread by field mice in the southwestern United States several years ago.
According to the newspaper, FEMA was called out to manage an outbreak of the hantavirus. Are you familiar with what the Federal Emergency Management Agency's real power is? FEMA allows the White House to suspend constitutional government upon declaration of a national emergency. Think about that. What is an agency with such broad sweeping power doing managing a small viral outbreak in suburban Texas?
A national emergency. Okay, well, Dr. Kory, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be back. Good to see you.
All right, good to see you. So let's just run down these questions systematically before we decide to panic like the New York Post is telling us to. First of all, can we trust these positive cases? What do you know about hantavirus testing and specifically the strain testing?
You know, it's hard because that's a pretty rare infection, especially in the United States. Most of the time, I mean, now we have PCR, which is ubiquitous, and you can use that, but it's typically historically, like even the CDC, they use antibodies. So you have to wait until they form antibodies to be, I think that's the much more, I would say, specific or accurate test. But PCR, really, you can only test after symptoms. So again, you know, we've gone through the testing with COVID, you know, the sensitivities and specificities of PCR. Ultimately, any diagnosis, it really has to be in the proper clinical context. So you really need to have the syndrome which fits hantavirus, right? And hantavirus, the two things that make it relatively unique, at least early on, it's a severe viral infection. Like think of like the worst flu you've had, but it's really known for severe myalgias, like really bad muscle aches And so if muscle aches are severe and predominating, you got to really put hantavirus much higher on your differential diagnosis. But it has to be within a clinical context. Otherwise, no test really matters. So if those patients are really sick in terms of a classic syndrome of a hemorrhagic virus, could be real. Could be real. I don't know enough about those cases. I just know that there were some deaths, which also suggests it, because hantaviruses have like between 25 and 50% mortality rate. So if 3 people are already dead on that cruise, I wonder how many people on the cruise are sick.
Well, we all like to think COVID is behind us, but what if the effects are still lingering in the body, especially in the brain? A new study from NYU Langone Health found something really alarming, that people suffering from long COVID showed changes in a part of the brain responsible for protecting and cleaning brain tissue. Researchers are linking this to chronic inflammation, early warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. And this may help explain why more than 20 million Americans are still dealing with long COVID symptoms like fatigue, shortness of breath, and that frustrating brain fog. Scientists believe ongoing inflammation and spike protein exposure may be disrupting the brain's natural cleanup system. And the wellness company has their ultimate spike detox, and that is your solution. It's created by our friend Dr. Peter McCullough. This formula was designed to support the body's natural detox process and inflammatory balance, and it contains 4 times the nanokinase that's found in most spike products, along with bromelain, turmeric, and selenium to support circulation and cellular cleanup. So if lingering inflammation and spike protein exposure are part of the problem, supporting your body's detox systems may be one of the smartest things that you can do. So give your brain a break. Get your bottle of Ultimate Spike Detox today. Head over to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted to get 10% off. Again, that's twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted to get 10% off.
You know, I see all the memes about ratatouille because you're supposed to really only get it from rodents. It is not commonly known to be transmissible between humans. What do you think of the idea that it could be transmitting to a flight attendant, possibly to someone who's been, exposed to someone on the cruise ship? That should not happen from what we currently know, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give 2 answers to that. I'll give you the textbook answer and then this brave new world we're in. The textbook answer is that it's really poorly transmissible human to human. In fact, there's really only one strain that you even concern yourself with, and unfortunately, that's the strain that was apparently on that ship. It's called the Andes virus. It's from South America. The American strains and European strains, really rare to have human-to-human transmission. The other aspect, though, even with the Andes virus, it's not considered a common transmission route. And really, in order to have it transmitted, you have to have really close contact, like almost like intimate, respiratory secretions, kissing, maybe like close physical caregiving. But it's not something you're going to walk down the street and get from somebody. So I don't think we should go there. But, in your intro, I listened to tell you, there's, what you learn as a doctor is you learn to be expert at seeing patterns. And the patterns of anomalies make me uneasy here, like particularly, and I don't know that you mentioned this, but like, why would a pharmaceutical company come up with a vaccine for a virus that's not transmissible between humans to humans? And they, I can't remember which company did that, but they did that in the last year or two. And that really kind of bothers me, because there's only one rationale for developing a vaccine for a virus that cannot be really to any appreciable extent transmissible between humans. And that's if you're preparing for a doomsday scenario where somehow a highly transmissible strain emerges. And so remember, coronavirus used to be a cold, and then we saw one that became airborne and highly transmissible, one of the most highly transmissible viruses we've seen. And so, I don't want to go dark here, but, there's so much monkey business going around the bioweapons research, and they're doing, by the way, there's no such thing as defensive bioweapons research. Like, anyone who's doing research in bioweapons, there's no difference between offensive and defensive. So anytime they're like monkey around with these viruses, you got to worry. Right.
So it's Moderna there that is, Moderna. And Moderna did in fact have a COVID-19 vaccine. If we're looking at, can we put that back up on the screen, please? 2024 is the date of this, when Moderna stock really was plummeting precipitously, because of the fall off of the COVID-19 vaccine uptake. So, yeah, I mean, we're not saying we know why they would do this. We don't. But you make a good point. Why would they need to for a vaccine that you can only get from animals and has no human transmission? So, okay. Dr. Robert Malone posted this tweet today saying, your odds of being struck by lightning are 7 times greater than getting hantavirus. So it should not be a big concern for the vast majority of Americans. How do you feel about the odds? I mean, that's not really telling us, the pathology, but it's just sort of the odds. What do you think?
The odds are tiny. I mean, again, a traditionally textbook answer, right? You'd only get it, like the classic scenario is like you get it from aerosolized like rat or mouse feces or urine. And so the classic transmission is like when you go to, sweep out or dust out like an old shed or barn or something where rats have infiltrated and their droppings are there. And so it creates a little dust and you could inhale it. But like Robert said, it's really rare and you shouldn't be concerned about it, except for the question mark that I keep bringing up. Again, I don't want to falsely fear-monger because that's also part of the tactics, right? I mean, I hate going back into COVID, but we know all of that was a catastrophe and it was man-made, and we saw how it rolled out, and we saw how so much action was taken against early treatments that were effective and pointing us to vaccines. And do we see that same sequence of events starting to line up here? I really hope not. But you know what? I'm going to say something rather boastful. Those of us on the front lines who treat infections, we learned so much from COVID. We have so many different things that are broadly effective antivirals. And like you mentioned, ivermectin would be a great candidate to once again save the day. It's highly effective against RNA viruses, which is like hantavirus. And so have your ivermectin ready.
Right. So I brought along this tweet by Dr. Bowden, who put online that because this is an RNA virus, then ivermectin should work against this. And then immediately she's community noted. The community notes talk about, can you read them there? They talk about how, it's more to do with the nucleus than anything else. So, I'm always, I don't know, okay, this happened during the COVID-19 pandemic where we were not allowed to even use the term ivermectin on YouTube. We would have gotten punished. We didn't even say the word because our channel would have been punished for it. So I'm interested in what we are not allowed to know. So what do you think of this community note?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same pattern that we've seen throughout COVID, right? Anytime anyone suggests that something might work against a treatment when it goes, because remember, with COVID, they had treatments that they wanted us to use and rely on, and they constructed evidence bases around them to make them the only ones with sufficient evidence to use on a national level. And so anything that doesn't reach their threshold for evidence is always going to be, like, as you said, community noted, right? With the same thing all the time, insufficient evidence. It might work, but don't rely on it. And, I'll tell you, when COVID broke out, right, and I wrote the book, The War on Ivermectin, which is really detailing a massive coordinated disinformation campaign against ivermectin. And it started right at the foundations of science in the manipulated, fraudulently designed trials trying to show that ivermectin didn't work. We know that part of this strategy is to try to denigrate, suppress, and censor easy, cheap, safe solutions. I'm sorry to say that, but it's true.
And then finally, what do you make of this? So people on social media are getting really anxious that hantavirus was listed as a possible adverse event for the COVID vaccine. Is it just because, they're talking about anything that you can catch because a vaccine would lower your immunity? Or what do you make of this?
That's a bizarro one that I don't have a neat assessment of. It's funny because a colleague had sent me that today, a screenshot of the fact that it was listed as the side effect. And I'm like, why would they list it? Why would you think that possibly it could be related to COVID? And I guess maybe there was just one person who had gotten hantavirus after cleaning out an old shed. And so it went on there. So I think it's a weak association at best. But what actually kind of intrigued me more, Natalia, about what you said is, is a colleague told me that there was like 100,000 articles written around the world on hantavirus in the last couple of days. And that's not typical for a hantavirus outbreak. Certainly there's always attention and people get scared, but like that's the other thing with COVID. It was COVID, COVID, COVID 24/7. And then when you said in your intro about how it seems to be driven by influencers, I'm sorry if I'm getting too like I don't know. I actually never want to use the word tin hat because I'm not a tin hat, but these patterns are anomalous. Why, with just this little outbreak of a few cases, suddenly like it's consuming the world's media cycle? Like, for instance, I'm on talking about it today. It's because it's being driven by something.
Right. Well, again, why I wanted to talk to you, because the hysteria is beginning. Is it time to buy the toilet paper? Is it time to get the masking? Is it just a media cycle because it's profitable for the media? But, then you see these mortality rates and you're like, oh, well, okay, what do I need to know? But like you said, doctors learned during the pandemic how to treat things in a new way, how to diagnose things, how to look at things. Journalists should have too. So I'm asking the questions up front that we should have asked in December of 2019. So that's why
100%.
Yeah.
Natalia, I want to make a point on that. In medicine, when you are faced with a patient presents to you with a problem, let's say the classic is chest pain, they're complaining of chest pain. You do not immediately say that it's heartburn, right? And dismiss heart attack. You generally, in medicine, we're trained to always rule out the worst possibility first, instead of dismissing it as benign and infection. I'm not saying that everyone should, start getting toilet paper, doing all these things, but that's kind of why I'm bringing up, possible treatments. If our worst fears are realized, then this is another, monkey business from bioweapons research, and that's why there's a vaccine that's ready and waiting, and suddenly there's a media firestorm that's bringing us a lot of attention to a cruise ship. That whole sequence of events, if that keeps going, and then next week maybe you have me back on and we're talking about a very different situation. God forbid, I really don't want that to happen, but I know how to treat it, and I'm sitting pretty not worried about it for me personally, but I would hate for another catastrophe to unfold.
Right. Okay. Well, hopefully this is just a media cycle, like shark attacks and pedophile priests. But if it's not, we'll talk again, and we'll learn from this. We're not going to do this again. This is not a fun sequel. We never meant to do it.
Definitely. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching Redacted. We'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. It's totally free if you want to follow us or subscribe. And if we brought you any value at all, please consider sharing this video with a friend or a loved one on social media. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.